Oklahoma is one of the most vulnerable states in the nation for natural hazards. We are located at the confluence of the three climatic zones. That's why we are so vulnerable to natural hazards. To the west, we have the hot arid zones, typical of New Mexico and Texas, Arizona. To the northeast is the moderate temperature zone, characteristic of the northeast of the part of the country, and then the hot arid, humid zone, characteristic of southeastern part of the United States. And these all converge right in Oklahoma and makes for some very wild weather patterns. We're either plagued by drought in the summers and flooding in the spring, and hail and high winds and tornadoes. So we are very vulnerable to most natural hazards. Tulsa is typical of most communities. We are located on a major river, and most communities have water bodies through their communities and share the same kinds of problems that the city of Tulsa has had. From our founding, we have been plagued by flooding since we were located on the Arkansas River. We've had major floods every few years, every 10 years. There are about 10 major items that I'd like to cover that are essential to a successful floodplain management program. And one of them is the media. You can have disaster events, and it depends on how the media plays it as to how successful you're going to be. If the media plays it like they did in Tulsa in the late 60s and early 70s, is that this is a natural hazard and it's to be expected and there's nothing you can do about it. If that's the way it's played, then you're usually not going to be able to address the problem properly. On the other hand, city of Tulsa was very fortunate that we had Ann Patton as the reporter for the Tulsa World, and she took on floodplain management as her personal goal to educate the people about floodplain management problems. And as a result of that, she stayed on it and educated the public, and we were able to make some real progress over the last 20, 30 years. This is the Keystone Dam, built by the Corps of Engineers just 18 miles upstream from the city of Tulsa. And the perception was then that flooding on the Arkansas River was pretty much under control. And the problem with structural projects like this is that they do only have limited protection ability, and it gives people a false sense of security. The problem that we all have in a developing community is the problem of urbanization. And the promise of urbanization is that we take broad floodplains that store water and have wetlands, and then we urbanize them and we put in a very small channel, and then urbanize and develop on the banks of the channel. And what happens is that we are going to really suffer catastrophic damages when these channels and structural projects are exceeded. This is Tulsa's development pattern over the last 50 years or so, and you can see that we started out with a core city, but then as the decades proceeded, we expanded into other drainage basins and we didn't do a very good job of anticipating urban drainage problems. This is a typical solution during the 50s, 60s, before we started our floodplain management program, and that is to say that we channelized our streams and tried to compress the flooding into a channel, concrete line channel, and built houses right on the edge of the creeks. And this is a typical single-purpose urban drainage channel, which is typical of the way that most communities address flooding. During the 1970s, we had the 100-year flood every 2 to 4 years in Tulsa, and that got people's attention, and they began to want to address it. In 1970, we had the Mother's Day flood, and Tulsa joined the National Flood Insurance Program. June 8th, 1974, we had 120 people injured, 3 deaths, $18 million in damages. 3 people were killed on the Memorial Day flood of 1976, $40 million in damages. And citizens' involvement and participation is key if you're going to have any kind of a successful floodplain management program. And citizen leaders began to come together primarily as a result of Ann Patton's work. She began to inform the people, and citizen leaders got together and converged upon City Hall and demanding that we take action on our flooding problems. Up until that time, the typical response of city leaders is to reestablish the pre-disaster status quo as quickly as possible. And so all we did was reestablish that status quo and got ready for the next flood to repeat the same damages that we had the years before. Now, during that period is the period that we called the floodplain wars of the 70s and 80s. And basically, it was the development community, which runs most cities and communities, versus concerned citizens. And that's a tough road to hoe, because their incomes are based upon being able to do what they want to do and to maximize every square foot of developable land, and they are not really very open to regulation and keeping floodplain lands in open space. And usually this shows the typical, developers oppose it. They get together with elected officials and oppose any kind of regulations. Then you have a disaster, and then you have awareness for a while, and then as time goes on, then you get back to the status quo. What is needed in any program, if you're going to make any kind of progress, is a local champion. And if you don't have a local champion, you're not going to get anywhere. And we were very fortunate in the 70s. We had Stan Williams, who was the deputy director of the Planning Commission. And Stan had a clue. He understood the relationship between floodplains, floodplain management, urban planning, comprehensive planning. And he then became the staff champion for floodplain management. And then we also had Commissioner Norma Eagleton, and she then took on floodplain management as a objective for her office and brought it to the City Council, City Commission. Before, whenever we would bring floodplain management issues up and we didn't have a champion, okay, next item, thank you, and moved on without any action at all. When you have a champion there, though, the whole dynamic changes. And then she says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to address this issue, and keeps it on the agenda. And that's key. If you don't have a champion, you're not going to get anything done. Another key person was Charles Hart. Charles Hart was a hydrologic engineer, and he originally was brought into the game by the development community because that's what he represented was the developers. But Charles was a different sort of guy. Once he got into being the city engineer in charge of floodplain management, he was very open. And he came to ASFPM, and he came to Oklahoma Floodplain Managers Conferences. And he began to change his attitude, and he saw that it was a real challenge to do the right thing. And he went from city engineer to director of public works to the chief operations officer of the city of Tulsa. And with that kind of knowledge and background, he was able to move the city of Tulsa in ways that very few people, other people would have been able to. And he was, for all practical purposes, the mayor of the city of Tulsa for the last 30 or 40 years. We had other elected politicians that came and went, but Charles was the real power behind the floodplain management, and he kept it on the city's agenda and made sure that we continued to make progress. Another key to a successful program is partnerships. And in fact, it's probably the most important key. We can't do it alone. And the beauty of ASFPM is that we have the opportunity to meet with other people from throughout the nation and who are having similar problems, and we discuss these issues with them and see what they're doing, and then we take them back home and try to implement those kinds of programs. And Larry Larson took Tulsa under his wing, and he came to Oklahoma and helped us work through all these kinds of issues. And we can't thank ASFPM and Larry Larson enough for Tulsa's successful program. Dr. John Kussler, he was director of the Association of State Wetland Managers. And before Dr. Kussler and ASWM, we didn't really recognize the natural values of floodplains. And that changed the whole dynamic. All of a sudden, we saw that there was a useful purpose for keeping those floodplains open rather than just keeping from people building there. They had real natural beneficial functions. And also, is Dave Carlton, is he here? Dave, stand up. Dave has been instrumental in helping us understand the value of natural floodplains. And David Fowler, where are you? Are you here? Dave Fowler with Natural Floodplain Functions Alliance, NFFA, again, have been very, very helpful in helping people understand the value of floodplains left in natural open space. We also have a great debt to the Denver Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. They were our model when we first started on our program to try to adopt better standards than the NFIP's minimum standards. Denver had already done that, and they had been very successful. And they developed the concept of comprehensive master drainage plans. And Ken Wright was our consultant from Denver and helped us put together a comprehensive program of floodplain management. And of course, Gilbert White also took an interest in Tulsa because he saw that we were really serious about trying to get a handle on our floodplain management programs. So Tulsa, when we joined the NFIP, we realized that program left something to be desired. It may be okay for a rural community or a community that is totally developed, But if you have a growing community, the NFIP, if you follow their guidance, all it's going to do is get you in trouble. And so what we are increasing, 5 minutes already, wow. I'll just zip through some of these now. So we took a different approach. We instituted a program of basin-wide master drainage plans. We began buying houses out of the floodplain. We made sure that all of our drainage ways and floodplain management facilities were multiple use, so that a detention pond just didn't sit there and store water every 5 or 10 years, but it was used by the public all the time. Our approach then was to have a comprehensive watershed approach, and the community rating system, CRS, was extremely important and helpful in helping us go beyond the national minimum standards, because it laid out a roadmap as to what you can do and how to do it. And not only that, it rewards your citizens of your community with reductions in their flood insurance policies. This is the city of Tulsa and our drainage basins, and each of those drainage basins have a comprehensive master drainage plan. And what we decided was that the FEMA NFIP floodplain is just going to get you in trouble, because what it does basically is protect the floodway, to keep the water moving downstream. But it puts no emphasis at all in keeping the floodplain vacant. What it does, in fact, is tells you how to develop the floodplain, and that's the wrong message. What we want to do is keep that floodplain open and dedicated to natural and beneficial uses. This is typical of what happens if you follow the NFIP standards, because they don't take full urbanization into account. And here is a floodplain where houses were permitted, and then as the basin continued to develop, those houses then became within the floodplain, and now they are underwater with a 100-year event. And that's what following the NFIP minimum standards is going to get you if you have a developing community. What we decided in Tulsa to do was to have two floodplains. One of them is the NFIP floodplain, which is used for insurance purposes. The other is our regulatory floodplain, which allows no fill of the floodplain and is based upon total urbanization of the basin. In our floodplain, we don't allow any fill whatsoever in the city of Tulsa. You can fill the floodplain, but you have to also then take the same amount of fill out of the floodplain to compensate for it. We also have used multidisciplinary teams. Our drainage plans are not just an engineering phenomenon, but they involve planners, landscape architects, engineers, citizen involvement. And we involve the citizens from day one. The worst thing that can happen is you develop a plan and you take to get it to be adopted, and then the citizens appear. It's the first time they've heard about it, and they object to the whole plan because they don't know anything about it. And you avoid that by involving the citizens from the very beginning, and there is nothing to be feared by involvement of the citizens. This is a typical basin-wide comprehensive master drainage plan, and this is the solution. And there are no one-size-fits-all solutions to your drainage problems. We have detention storage, sometimes have underground conduits that are required. The yellow are where there is no structural solution to the problem, and we buy those houses out. And in the middle, down here, there was no solution at all to the problems in that area. It was primarily industrial. The floodplain, the flooding was 1 to 2 feet deep, and the solution to those people was floodproofing. Progress and implementation. In 1984, we had the flood of record, and we had a very courageous mayor, and he said, we don't want to do this anymore. We're not going to continue to reestablish the pre-disaster status quo. And we had one of the first major buyout programs in the nation. We implemented Section 1362 of the Flood Insurance Act, and our congressman then went to Congress and got funding to allow us to buy houses out of the floodplain. And this is then our vision for the use of the floodplain once we move the houses out. We also have regional detention ponds, and those regional detention ponds are all multi-purpose, multi-objective facilities. They store water during floods, but the rest of the time they are used by the public for park recreation and recreation purposes. CRS is a key to our successful program, and French Wetmore has guided us from the very beginning. And we are, in 2000, we became the nation's first Class 3 CRS community. In 2003, then, we became the nation's first Class 2 community. We have public information and education program where all citizens who are located in the city's regulatory and the NFIP floodplain are notified every year that they are, and we promote flood insurance. We have converted our floodplains and our drainage ways into open space, and these are just typical. This is some of the examples of our stormwater detention ponds. We try to make them as attractive as possible. And we also try then to beautify our urban streams and make them useful so that the folks know that if you just leave your floodplains vacant, you're always going to have developers then that are going to try to come in and develop that floodplain. And you've got to make your floodplains useful to the public so that nobody can come back in and try to develop those floodplains. Key is also funding. You've got to have a funding mechanism. And in the city of Tulsa, we had a storm drainage utility fee that pays for administration, planning and engineering, maintenance and operation, and small drainage projects. And funding is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you can't improve your drainage problems. So what we're all about here as floodplain leaders, as General Henry says, instead of just floodplain managers, is we are trying to create multi-use places where families can enjoy nature. Our challenges, even of a successful programs like Tulsa, are complacency and apathy. We've gone 25 years now without major flood damages, and even in the current last several weeks, where flooding has impacted a lot of communities and all the communities surrounding Tulsa, we haven't had any damages in Tulsa at all. And all the communities that have not adopted higher standards have got their hands full dealing with the flood damages. Our other challenge is urban natural channels. When you double the runoff, it's very, very difficult to keep a channel in its natural condition. And I think that's a big challenge for us as floodplain leaders, is to try to overcome that kind of problem. And implementation of low-impact development is another challenge that we are now trying to face. So this is what our goal and objective is our natural approach to the city's streams. and how to make that work in an urban environment. And the major lesson that we have learned from all this is learn from others. And that's the beauty of ASFPM and other organizations. So thank you very much.